Our next presenter is Dr. David Schei, and probably most of you know him as the President of Furman University. You hear his voice on the radio as he presents his commentary on the EPR or NPR stations across the state of South Carolina. He does that from up here. But one of the things you might not know is that before that life of fame, he'd actually written 2 books on living a simple life. And I actually have them here in my hand. And they're his, so you probably can't buy them. But I would just let you know that there's more, even more, to David Schei than you absolutely knew about. And he's here to talk to us about living the simple life. Dr. David Schei.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Very good. I'm not going to ask you to walk on broken glass today, but I am going to ask you to walk more lightly on the earth today, and tomorrow, and next year. Today I want to indulge in one of life's great pleasures, perhaps its greatest pleasure, telling other people how to live. My goal is very simple. I want to provoke you to reflect upon who you are, where you're headed, and what you value most. In the process, I want to discuss the elusive ideal of simplicity as a tantalizing path to happiness. Are you willing to listen? Yes. Baxter, are you listening? Vicki? Simplicity has deep roots in all of the world's great religions and philosophies. Give me neither poverty nor wealth, but only enough, says the biblical author of Proverbs, while the Taoists believe that those who know they have enough are truly rich. Now, amid the prolonged stresses and strains of the Great Recession, more Americans than ever before are attracted to the ideal of plain living and high thinking. Last March, the editors of Time magazine published a cover story entitled, "The End of Excess. Is This Crisis Good for America?" They noted the chastening effects of the recession that have led many people to rethink their priorities. "We cannot go back to business as usual," Time magazine declared. "People must become less self-indulgent and revert to sanity and normal living." I suspect that the recession has led you as well to rethink your own notions of the good life, whether you wanted to or not. Those of us in this room have grown up within a relentless consumer culture that dominates American life. In the 80s, Madonna proclaimed that she was a material girl living in a material world. She then added, "They can beg and they can plead, but they can't see the light, because the boy with the cold, hard cash is always Mr. Right." Such unabashed consumerism drove the economy during the 80s, the 90s, and the first decade of this century. From multiple credit cards to home equity loans to second mortgages, legions of consumers extended their purchasing power by borrowing heavily to finance discretionary purchases. And as a result, consumer debt grew almost twice as fast as the gross national product. We came to believe that nearly every need can be met, every anxiety relieved, every want satisfied by acquiring something more, something new, something better. But in fact, it rarely turns out that way. Hidden beneath the superficial appeal of life in the fast lane is the disturbing fact that the 3 most frequently prescribed drugs in this nation are an ulcer medication, a hypertension reliever, and a tranquilizer. One result of our preoccupation with more money and more things has been increasingly excessive work schedules, especially among white-collar professionals. Work at its best is a calling rather than simply a career, a passion rather than a profession. Work in its ideal sense involves something that engages us, excites us, inspires us. It connects us with something bigger than ourselves. But all too often, our work is in fact more deadening than devotional. It becomes the be-all and end-all of our existence. In white-collar sweatshops across the nation, more and more people are arriving earlier and staying later. Today, the typical corporate or professional worker spends 4 hours longer on average each week than in 1980 on the job and takes 20% fewer vacation days. Something has to give. A New York management consultant last month reported that everybody is exhausted and nobody really thinks things are going to get any better. We've become addicted to a daily routine of frenzied hurry. People feel shackled to their high-octane jobs, skipping lunch hours and taking laptops, beepers, Palm Pilots, and cell phones home at night. As the Lexus commercial boasts, sure, we take vacations. They're called lunch breaks. We now operate within such a culture of frenzy that too much work is still not enough. One writer has called this the acceleration syndrome, a high-tech lifestyle that makes us all behave like whirling dervishes, spinning out of control to maintain our runaway routines. The other day, in fact, a young woman was rushing across the Furman campus and accidentally bumped into me. She looked back over her shoulder and apologized as she resumed her haste, breathlessly explaining that I'm late for my relaxation class. Henry David Thoreau saw the same frantic behavior in the 1840s. At one point, he asks in Walden, "Why should we live with such hurry and waste of life?" Time magazine posed the same question in a cover story titled "The Rat Race." The editors reported that the work ethic in white-collar America has gone berserk. Simply to remain competitive, the story noted, professionals find that their lives are one long, continuous workday, bleeding into the wee hours of the night and squeezing out any meaningful leisure time. The rat race can be exhilarating, especially if your work is intrinsically rewarding. But as Lily Tomlin says, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. So it's in this context that the ancient ideal of simpler living is witnessing a widespread revival. Polls show that 20% of salaried employees have exchanged fewer working hours for lower salaries in the last 2 years. Such so-called downsizers are using imagination, conviction, and resilience to embrace the concepts of sustainability, energy conservation, environmental stewardship, and conscientious consumption. Corporate executive Paul Hawken calls it the largest social movement in all of human history. The editors of The Economist magazine believe that the simplicity trend will survive the revival of the economy. Now, they say, many people no longer seem consumed by the desire to consume. Instead, they're planning to live within their means, and there's been a backlash against bling. Advertising and marketing experts label this new trend downshifting or living lightly. Are you ready to begin downshifting? Are you eager to clean out the clutter in your life? If so, then you first need to know that simplicity is more a state of mind than a particular standard of living. Mindful simplicity encourages us to be more conscious and conscientious about the making and spending of money and the investment of our time, our most precious resource. It means, very simply, leading a balanced life. It means restraining our material desires and regaining control of our calendars so as to nourish higher priorities such as faith, family, wellness, the arts, or social justice. Those who choose a simpler life often discover that pressures are reduced, the frenetic pace is slowed, and new and better priorities are established. Yes, less can be more. Small can be beautiful. But simplicity is neither easy nor simple. Socrates pointed out over 2,000 years ago that most people will not be satisfied with the simpler way of life. They will be for adding sofas and tables and other furniture and dainties and perfumes and incense. For simplicity to be sustainable, it needs to be sincerely embraced rather than grudgingly accommodated. One must choose it. Or as the Puritans would have said, one must be chosen for it. 'Tis a gift to be simple, sang the Shakers, and their message still rings true 200 years later. The good news I share with you today is that simpler living can be more than an anachronism, a fad, or an eccentricity. It doesn't require a rural homestead or a monastic regimen or a faddish preference for LL Bean boots, trail mix, and alfalfa sprouts. Purposeful simplicity in its essence involves a deliberate daily ordering and reordering of our personal priorities so as to distinguish each day between the necessary and the superfluous, the useful and the wasteful, the beautiful and the vulgar. This so-called Great Recession has brutally positioned us at a fork in the road. Climate change, population growth, environmental degradation, and the excesses of our heedless consumerism are creating one of those rare moments in history, a tipping point of unstable urgency that allows for incredible change in a short period of time. One path leads to an America that remains in denial that there is any reason for us to change our short-sighted ways. The other path leads to an America that acknowledges that there are limits to our exploitation of the environment and to our self-indulgent and short-sighted behavior. Yes, growth is inevitable. Indeed, for Greenville to be sustainable, it must grow. How we grow, however, is a fundamental question. We can grow chaotically, by chance, allowing our future and that of our grandchildren to be dictated by market forces that foster a sprawling, exploitive style of development, or we can grow by choice. That is, we can exercise our innate human ability to take the long view, to think consequentially, taking into consideration the fragility of our ecosystems, the limits of our natural resources, the virtues of our cultural and historic heritage, and the quality of our lives together. Thoreau appreciated the challenges and difficulties of taking the long view and swimming against the tide of prevailing attitudes and behaviors, but he closed his account of his experiment in simple living at Walden Pond with words of timeless reassurance. "I learned this by my experiment in simplicity," he wrote, "that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours." In that regard, I wish you good luck and Godspeed in your own efforts to pursue the happiness residing between too little and too much. It is, my friends, the only sustainable form of happiness we can pursue. Thank you.